So while everybody is moving, I just wanted to say hello to all of you here in the Gompa and all of you online. Thank you so much for joining us. And especially big welcome to our special visiting teacher, Venerable Gendun. Venerable, we could not be more honored to be here. It's like a dream coming true. And we realize that it's a big trip. Venerable is somewhat a nomad, but somewhat positioned in Amsterdam, in Netherlands. So it's a big trip to come to the US to get to know us. Venerable has an extremely rich and interesting history and experience, starting within the Theravada tradition and then continuing his practice and his studies in the Gelug tradition. Spent lots of time in different monastic settings and started at the request of Lama Zopa, an in-depth meditation training. And I think it will become clear to all of you who hate to meditate and only like to study that Venerable will try to get that attitude out of you and get you to actually meditate on what we are studying. Venerable, we would like to thank you for coming here. We hope that you will inspire us to spend more time, productive time on the cushion. And thank you so much for making your way all the way here to our little Santa Fe. We are honored to have you here. And we hope it's maybe the first, but definitely not the last time you are here. So we already invite you to come back before you even start speaking. And we'll invite you a few more times before you leave.
I'm looking forward to that. Thank you for that kind introduction.
Thank you. And just wanted to let our Zoom host know that we would like to offer a mandala. So if you could get that ready, that would be great. Thank you. Should we start with mandala and refuge prayers, or would you like to say a few words, Venerable?
No, we can, then let's start with the refuge prayer and the mandala. And then
okay, wonderful. So we'll start with that. Ready? Venerable, ready? Blue, ready? Good.
I'm sorry, I'm confused. Did you want to start with the prayers, or would you like to start with
Kayla, I think we're
only?
ready. So we'll start with the mandala offering and then continue with refuge prayer and bodhicitta. Is that the right sequence, Venerable, or should we do it the other way around? Please enlighten us. Okay, great. Okay, good. So the short mandala offering. Sajipuki Jukshin Metog Tramri Rablinji Nidegyen Padi Sangye Jingdu Mikte Uwai Droku Nam Dagjin La Chupar Shog Jetsun Lama Dampa Kyenam Ki Chuki Kala Kensei Chupali Jitan Sampai Du Jedzin Mala Jab Getru Ki Charpa Waptu Sul Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. We will continue with the prayers. Praise to Shakyamuni Buddha, Guru, Teacher, Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arhat, perfectly complete Buddha, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of beings to be subdued, teacher of gods and humans. To you, Buddha Bhagavan, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, we prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Guru, Teacher, Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arhat, perfectly complete Buddha, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans, to you, Buddha Bhagavan, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, we prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Guru, Teacher, Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arhat, perfectly complete Buddha, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of beings to be subdued, teacher of gods and humans, to you, Buddha Bhagavan, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, we prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When supreme among humans you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides, then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who were wise then, we prostrate. With pure bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 words, winner of the best, savior, to you we prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like a spotless moon, color like gold, to you we prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 words are not. Incomparably wise one, to you we prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Teacher having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean. To you, the one gone to thusness, we prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, we prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you the sublime continuum intending virtue, we prostrate. Do not commit any unwholesome actions, engage in perfect wholesome actions, subdue one's own mind. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a defective view, a butter lamp, flame, an illusion, a dewdrop, a water bubble, a dream, lightning, a cloud. See all causative phenomena like this. By these merits, may transmigratory beings attain the state of all-seeing, subdue the enemy of faults, and be freed from the ocean of samsara, disturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. Independent origination, there is no ceasing, no arising, no annihilation, no permanence, no coming, no going, no separateness, and no sameness. We prostrate to the consummate Buddha, the supreme among all teachers, the one who taught this peace, who is freed of elaborations. Request to the lineage gurus, to the root guru. Magnificent and precious root guru, please abide on the lotus and moon on our crowns. Guide us with our great kindness and grant us the realizations of your holy body, speech, and mind. To Guru Shakyamuni Buddha, holy body created by 10 million excellent virtues, holy speech fulfilling the hopes of infinite transmigratory beings, holy mind seeing all objects of knowledge just as they are. To the principle of the Shakyas, we make requests. Now Maitreya and Manjushri, supreme heirs of the unequaled teacher, having assumed the burden of all conquerors' deeds, emanating in innumerable Buddha lands, to Maitreya and Manjughosha, we make requests. And to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, you who have control over Hero Manjushri's speech, with a fine mind and transcendental wisdom, upholding the victorious one's teachings, deep as the ocean, Savior conquering the 3 levels of existence, to you, incomparable one, Jampal Ngawang Losang Geshe Tenzin Gyatso, we make requests. And to Kyabje Tupten Lopa Zopa Rinpoche, with your strong shoulders of learning and practice, you patiently establish in all directions the stainless banner of the Muni's teachings, and especially the teachings of Lama Tsongkhapa. To the extremely steadfast Tupten Zopa, we make requests. And to all spiritual friends, eyes viewing all the infinite scriptures, supreme gateway for the fortunate traveling to liberation, engaging with skillful means, moved by love to the illuminating spiritual friends, we make requests. And now the 7 in prayer. We prostrate reverently with our body, speech, and mind. We present clouds of every type of offering, both actually arranged and mentally emanated. We confess all our negative actions and downfalls collected from beginningless time. We rejoice in the virtues of ordinary beings and Aryas. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for transmigratory beings. We dedicate our own and others' virtues to great enlightenment. And we've already done the mandala offering. So continue with 4 immeasurables. How wonderful it would be if all sentient beings were to abide in equanimity, free from the closeness of attachment and the distance of hatred. May they abide in equanimity. We ourselves will cause them to abide in equanimity. Please, Guru Deity, bless us to be able to do this. How wonderful it would be if all sentient beings were to achieve Buddhahood. May they achieve Buddhahood. We ourselves will cause them to achieve Buddhahood. Please, Guru Deity, bless us to be able to do this. How wonderful it would be if all sentient beings were free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they be free from suffering and its causes. We ourselves will cause them to be free from suffering and its causes. Please, Guru Deity, bless us to be able to do this. How wonderful it would be if all sentient beings were never separated from the happiness of higher rebirth and liberation. May they never be separated from these. We ourselves will cause them never to be separated from these. Please, Guru Deity, bless us to be able to do this. Now refuge in bodhicitta. May we be the medicine and the physician for the sick. May we be their nurse until their illness never recurs. With showers of food and drink, may we overcome the afflictions of hungers and thirst. May we become food and drink during times of famine. May we be an inexhaustible treasury for the destitute. With various forms of assistance, may we remain in their presence. May we be the protector for those who are without protectors, a guide for travelers, and a boat, a bridge, and a ship for those who wish to cross over. May we be a lamp for those who seek light, a bed for those who seek rest, and may we be a servant for all beings who desire a servant. To all sentient beings, may we be a wish-fulfilling gem, a vase of good fortune, an efficacious mantra, a great medication, a wish-fulfilling tree, and a wish-granting cow. Just as the earth and other elements are useful in various ways in innumerable sentient beings dwelling throughout infinite space, so may we, in various ways, a source of life for sentient beings, present throughout space until they are all liberated. Just as the Sugatas of old adopted a spirit of awakening, and just as they properly conformed to the practice of the Bodhisattvas, so we ourselves shall generate the spirit of awakening for the sake of the world, and so we ourselves shall properly engage in those practices. Upon gladly adopting the spirit of awakening in this way, intelligent people should thus nurture the spirit in order to fulfill their wish. We take refuge until we are enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By our merits of listening to the Dharma, may we become Buddhas to benefit all transmigratory beings. We take refuge until we are enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By our merits of listening to the Dharma, may we become Buddhas to benefit all transmigratory beings. We take refuge until we are enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By our merits of listening to the Dharma, may we become Buddhas to benefit all transmigratory beings. Now our lives are fruitful. Human existence is well obtained. Today we have been born into the family of the Buddhas. Now we are children of the Buddha.
So how wonderful it is to be here in Santa Fe. Yeah. As I was saying earlier, the last time I was in this vicinity was 26 years ago, and it feels, well, literally like half a lifetime, for it is. In fact, there were photos at one point when I still had a Facebook account, and I was kicked off of Facebook recently, which might be auspicious. Maybe people tended not to recognize me from the photos. Yeah. Where to start? I mean, getting to know each other, and I feel like that every teaching is always a matter of finding the first sentences. It's like writing a good book. Once you had the first sentence, the rest comes quite by itself. The first thing that came to my mind when we were doing the prayers is that I was very happy to see my own ordination abbot standing next to me, the Atiśa Rinpoche, who unfortunately passed away recently. And have you wondered why we did all the lineage prayers? And that is to remind us that we live truly fortunate times as Westerners in many different ways. For one thing, we have not only access to good academic studies, but we still have access, and that is very important to people that have realized the Dharma for themselves. Now, the Buddha explained or warned 2,500 years ago that there will come a time when we only have the word left, where we don't know anymore what the word refers to. And we have blind devotion to text, but no longer access to the actual experience. And that time has not come yet. But when I look around me, it seems as though we are trying really to make an effort to get to that time when only the word is left. 2 weeks ago, I was in absentia giving a talk on for a climate crisis summit. I pre-recorded it because I was on the wrong side of the planet. And I started off with quoting from the Theravada Vinaya, the text of the monastic vows of the Theravadins, where it is quoted that the Buddha says the Dharma will remain in the world as long as it's arahats meditating in the forest. I said, I think that no one considered in the past 2,500 years that this passage was talking about forests and not about arahats. I think we all believed that at one point arahats and bodhisattvas would disappear, but in reality, what we are facing is that our forests are disappearing. To find forested natural areas in which one can meditate and pursue the calm of the mind are becoming increasingly rare. Yeah. Luckily, I can also report it from my time in Burma, but then Burma became a complete mess in and of itself, that the monastic order, at least from the various Buddhist traditions, are also making an effort to bring forests back. The forest monastery in which I lived in Burma, half of it was actually replanted forest, which I thought was an interesting proposition in that way. Yeah. And so we live challenging times, and I'm not going to say that in any politically partisan way, for very important reasons. Yeah. For the first, on the one hand, as a monk, I'm very luckily not partisan at all, to be honest. I think our problem obviously has become partisanship. Yeah. We can't talk to each other anymore, and that is more dangerous than any proposition at all, no matter to what part of what political party you belong to. And I think that is also where the Dharma really can make a difference. Yeah. But then we face challenges. And it always reminds me of a passage or a story from Thich Nhat Hanh's biography. Thich Nhat Hanh came for the first time here, I think in 1966. He was invited by the United Nations and then landed in New York in the middle of massive protests on the airport, because at the same time, American soldiers were flown back into New York as well. And there were people standing there with placards stating, you are baby killers and so on and so forth. And then he says something important. His own reflection was like, how do you think that without peace in your heart that you can bring peace to this world? And so what he warns us, and I think that is we should take to heart, that just to blame some undefined other party creates more problems. It makes us feel self-righteously correct. But in reality, we are throwing fuel on the fire. And actually, before I came here, I thought of a passage of the Pali Canon that I wanted to share with you, which I think is very poignant, and I can't quote it by heart, unfortunately. I should memorize it. He says in 2 different sutras, based on judgment, taking himself as a measure, he enters upon disputes in the world. Having abandoned all judgments, a person does not create strife in the world. And so I think it is fascinating to see how that is still accurate 2,500 years later. And we will see that will play an important part of what we're going to explore this evening and next week. And that is the theme of views. Yeah. Views that we are attached to, by which we identify. That these are our problem and not their outcome. We over-focus on symptoms rather than the cause. So if we want to make a difference, we should first start doing something about the cause. Yeah. And the Buddha then continues to say, having loosened the knots in the world, the Muni does not take sides. And then my handwriting, does not take sides that are arisen in disputes. He is peaceful amongst the restless, equanimous, without grasping, while others grasp. And I think that is where I would like to see if we can get together in our challenging times. How does Buddhist practice, actually, especially the practice on emptiness, inform our activities in the world for the for the betterment or the benefit of both our society and the larger world that we live in? How do we engage pursuing what we perceive to be just in such a way that we actually do make a difference? Because I think here emptiness practice is actually quite essential. Having said that, if this evening, if you have questions, please raise them. Some of you know me, and you know I can talk forever, but that is not necessary. So you have questions and you wanted to take it to in one direction, on other, that is true for those present on Zoom as well. Please don't hesitate. Yeah. Yeah. And so the larger topic is views. And I think the text of Atiśa that I shared with you on the website today, if you don't already have it, then you can download it later from the website, but I will quote from it extensively. That takes meditation on emptiness as a subject, but I will explain it in a way with regard specifically to the views that are making our world very difficult to navigate on the one hand. And that makes it very difficult, or increasingly difficult, for us ourselves to keep our heads above the water, as they say in Holland. When half of your country is below sea level, then that expression makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And so how do we stay motivated and calm and encouraged and inspired and full of energy in an environment that seems to feel ever more deflating, depressed, overwhelming, and so on and so forth. Again, regardless of your actual political or other position. Yeah. That so far, that seems like a good plan. Then we can take it there. Yeah. Maybe as an intermezzo to say something about me for you, those of you that don't know me. Oh yeah, tissues are, yeah, for some reason, all of a sudden, my nose is doing weird things, yeah. Oh, sorry for those on Zoom, that was unkind to you. So now you have a deep insight on what my nose sounds like. That was not entirely where you came from, really, but here we are. Yeah. But before we start and before we head into views, because I think what I do says something about the topic as well. So I come here on, let's take a few steps back. In conversation, I was the resident teacher in Amsterdam for 6 years. I did over 3 years of retreat. When I came out of retreat, I wanted to move to another retreat center. I needed some help with my knees. 3 years of sitting in lotus had ruined my knees, and I needed to see a doctor. And my idea was to go then to a retreat center in France, teach there, and then visit a doctor there. But my teacher, as teachers tend to do, had very different ideas. He said, you speak Dutch, you go to Amsterdam. Yeah, so to Amsterdam instead. I taught there for 6 years. In a way, that was a good thing to do. I taught almost every FPMT program there. And that was a good way to find vocabulary. It can be challenging to translate meditative experience. On the one hand, as you all know, it can be very challenging to translate scholastic knowledge into meditation, but the opposite way around is equally true. So once you have an idea what that refers to, it is also quite something to then express that again, because all experience, all meditative experience is also quite personal. It is as it is seen and felt by you. So in that sense, it was quite fortunate. It was also fortunate another way is that that is always close to my heart. In 2008 in France, there were major terrorist attacks, and you know in that sense what I talk about. You had some of your own. A Jewish family was shot in Toulouse in front of their school. And I was already collaborating with others there. I always thought that we need friendship relationships. Friendship is everything. All the talking of the world is not making a difference comparable to simple friendship relationships. And in Toulouse, I was actually initiated by, interestingly enough, the Muslim Scouts. The Muslim in France, for a secular country, it is interesting that their scouts are all religion-based. But in Holland, it still has religious parties. The scouts are just a single organization. But here we are. But the Muslim Scouts have their director at the time was a professor at the local Catholic university. And for academic students, he organized every year something which is called the Tent of Abraham, in which he invited speakers from different spiritual traditions. And at that time, we had been doing that for a few years, and that had connected me with like a friendship network. I met a few people there, amongst other things, from a Benedictine monastery. And then for Easter, the Catholic radio invited me to go to the monastery to say something, and so on and so forth. And so we had become mutually invested. We were visiting each other, having cups of coffee. And so this terrorist attack happened. And then politics do what politics do. And that is partisan, angry stuff. And they had very little in terms of hands-on things to say or to do. They had no clue how to approach this. Something terrible had happened, and it was like a gap there. And then all of a sudden, I get a phone call from one of the monks from the Benedictine monastery. And he says, "Well, I've just been called by the imam from the mosque in Toulouse. We are organizing a march together. Are you coming? And will you bring some people? And could you call your friends?" And so within 3 days, everyone called everyone else. And we marched with 35,000 people through the streets of Toulouse, flanked by the Jewish and Muslim scouts, children. So we were held by 8, 9-year, 10-year-olds. Yeah. And so to have adult people held by 10-year-olds and fronted by religious leaders of different strains was impressive. And that was the answer. Not a partisan attack on each other, but friendship. Because it builds trust. It builds trust, it shows that we still have one world together. Some people do crazy things, but that will happen. As long as the Buddha says, as long as there are afflictions in this world, as long as there's ignorance in this world, these things will continue to happen. It is up to the rest of us to create a common world and to make everyone believe that we still have one. Yeah. And so when I came to Amsterdam, there was an outcome of what had happened in France was a university training that was then replicated in Amsterdam University, and we started to do the same thing there. Yeah. But as you just said, Nina just said, after 6 years, I did feel that we were overemphasizing scholastic studies. Yeah, a lot of talking, but we need to achieve the ground, the paths that we talk about. Remember that Lama Zopa Rinpoche at the beginning of my own monastic life said, if you just keep talking and talking and talking, then in the end, Buddhism will be an intellectual pursuit in the West. That the Dharma will have no roots. Now, you will keep being dependent on Tibetans, but you will have no people here having an actual experience of the Dharma. And that is not good enough. Okay. And so I had already started slowly to develop this, what we now call the in-depth meditation training, as an addition to the basic program. I'm not sure if you're offering that here. Yeah. Yes. So it was based initially on that training. But for those of you that are already doing it with me, you know that it has a bit more of an ecumenical approach to it. So we follow the Gelug tennis system, which I think is valid. Tsongkhapa's insights are invaluable, but we also need brotherhood and sisterhood in between the different Buddhist traditions. Yeah. That I think if we want to make a dent, then we need that as well. All the sons of daughters of the Buddha should more collaborate. That is, in all my time in trying to build bridges, I found it much harder to work with other Buddhist traditions than to work with other religious traditions, which is not a good sign, to be honest. Yeah. And that is the wealth that we have in the West. No Tibetans, the average Tibetan had never seen a Chan monk or a Theravada monk. Yeah, this was a world away. This was a year of travel across the Himalayas one way or another, and vice versa. No, and here you can take a car, and I'm pretty sure that within 50 kilometers circle, you can find any Buddhist tradition imaginable. And so we're almost back to from where we started. And we're all the daughters and sons of the Buddha can meet each other again. And that is something to rejoice in. But anyway, and so my idea is to keep coming back for 10 years. Your immigration services willing and my health or my karma willing, you never know. I do my best on both sides. So that we may grow together, both in studies, but also in practice. Yeah. And so the in-depth meditation training was set up by me on the one hand to have that bit more of a ecumenical approach, but also to bind the FPMT centers more closely together which in the absence of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, of course, is equally very important. And I was very happy to see already online, although I see many screens turned off. I shall not complain about it. As already different people from different centers. And maybe you could turn one of the screens a bit towards me. Is that possible? Otherwise, I might bring my own laptop next time around. See, now I can check which screens are still turned off. Yeah. Yeah. Good to see you, indeed. Because I think also, as an FPMT community, as sons and daughters of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, it is also very important to find that clock in our times. I often think we might not individually be able to live up to Lama Zopa's example, but surely together. That is a good way of looking at things. But again, and that is maybe the final point here to make, is that if I would have to say, if the in-depth meditation training is based on anything, it is based on Lama Zopa Rinpoche. In the sense that I think he is an excellent model for having been a yogi in the world. No, he did what most of us recognize from our past, that he was also the director of an immense organization. It took a huge amount of effort, had to build that legacy of Lama Yeshe into what it is today. And still he managed to show the attainment of the great Mahayana paths. And so he gives us a good example of what it would look like to be a practitioner both in the world and having worldly commitments, while at the same time having a very fruitful and deep meditative life that is truly transformative. And the Mahayana Sutras emphasize that the Buddhas manifest themselves as our teachers in front of us in ways that we can relate to. And I say often, I think that we are occasionally too eager to put people like Lama Zopa Rinpoche or the Trisha Rinpoche on a pedestal. Well, I think the point is to challenge us, like you can do that as well. Yeah. And I remember I came, as you now know, from the Theravada tradition when I met Tibetan Buddhism. And initially, well, all the stories of Lama Zopa Rinpoche were quite overwhelming, I must say, because everyone makes it into something, of course. Now, everyone had his own myths about Rinpoche, as it were. And I had not met him in person. I just ended up doing a retreat there and in Nalanda Monastery and then ordained in southern France. But when I was living in India a bit later, and the abbot of Nalanda passed away, and I was asked to go and see Rinpoche, to ask for a new abbot. And I was surprised by his humanness. I had a wonderful conversation with him for an hour and a half, I guess. And I thought that, he was a magnificent mirror to myself. No, not bringing him down by way of me, but lifting me up by way of him. Now, when I was sitting there with him, I thought, I can do that. It might take me a while, but I can. It's doable. Now I saw just another human being, but at the same time, was free of the boundaries that I felt within me. And I think that is the mark of a great teacher. It is easy to sit on this throne and to be special and charismatic, but it is a different ballgame to make other people feel that they could actually finish the path in this lifetime, and that maybe we should. On the one hand, because sentient beings really, really need it today. Yeah. And at the same time, if we continue destroying our natural environment in this way, we might all too early end up with an environment in which the pursuit of the Dharma is not possible at all anymore. So these are two very good reasons to study vast and wide and to practice hard. Yeah. We will see. So what we'll do is the 2 Tuesdays will be more or less around Madhyamaka, but as I said, in a both contemporary way and trying to inform us how to keep our head above the water with the current circumstance. So I will take a slightly different turn than Atiśa is taking in this text, but the emptiness argument will be the same. And then this weekend we'll have a 2-day retreat with an evening, starting Friday evening, to put all of that into practice. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so I would like to, because I need some time, and I'm already, I always say I have one enemy in this world, and it's hanging on your wall. Yeah. And the enemy tells me I have only 40 minutes to go. And Lama Zopa Rinpoche could just talk on for 5 hours, but I've tried doing the same thing, but it doesn't work. Yeah, I can do that in retreats because then people have no place to run away to. And they are mine. But, yeah. 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 So, just to work a bit backwards, I highlighted views. And so when the Buddha uses the word views, or here translated as judgment, he does not use that as the Buddha often does not use that in a general way. He does that in a specific way. Yeah. So when the Buddha talks here about judgment or views, he talks about views that we identify with. Yeah. For many different reasons. And one of the main reasons, and that is very important for us to figure out, is that we don't come about to views as we think we do. That's both quite humbling on the one hand, and very informative about how we should engage with the world around us. To approach that, the Buddha explains something which is called the 12 links of dependent origination, of which you might have heard. And if you have not heard of it, then don't worry, I won't explain all 12 of them. I will explain enough of them to have some idea of how we get that, because that is very important to understand. When we count backwards, the Buddha actually says that our identity is formed around views. So that is the backward order. And that is very important to understand, because we believe that our identity is something authentic to us. I have a long list of words that I would love to delete from the English language and the Dutch language as well. And authentic is definitely on them. An authentic self, that's even worse. If I could flush it, it would go today. Yeah. And we have this deep sense that the story about ourselves is true and is our own. But it's very important to understand that that is not the case. A good way to approach that is that or to exemplify it, is that in the 19th century, the British government, possibly when this was still Britain, just to tease you, when you were still under the other king, that the law was being made to teach literature in schools in order to give children the narratives to build their identity as a good British person with. So they were taught, especially Bible and Shakespeare. These were seen as deeply British. And so they were taught specific literature in order for them to have narratives by which to build their self-identity, which is very interesting to see. And so the stories that we use to make sense of our own lives come from a social pool of stories. And that increasingly will become important this evening and next week. Does it make a bit sense? That is very important, because that also means that, to give you a bad example or a terrible example of this, I grew up in a very Christian Holland. And I grew up in sort of the last bit of a Christian Holland, to be honest. Moreover, my father was from the 1920s. At my home, it looked like pre-Second World War. There was an interesting divide between outside and inside. Well into the 1980s, well into the end of the 1970s, we had the black and white television, with buttons, that to warm up for 10 minutes. And so at the age of 18, first of all, I went into palliative care, and then I was hired to help with the refugees coming from the Yugoslavia war. And it was 1988. you had the fall with the disintegration of the Soviet Union. War broke out everywhere along in East Europe. And Yugoslavia, that had been my father's preferred place of holidays, descended into complete chaos. And thousands of people started to stream across the borders of Orthodox religion and Muslims, wherever they were threatened. And there was a Holland in which the government asked families to take refugees in. And so I was managing the placement of refugees in these homes. And in fact, I had more homes than refugees. The competition was on the other side. So people were angry if they didn't get one. So I was dealing not with problematic refugees, I was dealing with problematic families. They were disappointed that I could not furbish them with the refugees from Croatia or whatever place they were coming from. Yeah, it shows you how much our world has changed. Yeah. At that time, these people were called asylum seekers. And asylum meant something. And asylum, the word was heard in the context of the Bible. You know, I was naked and you clothed me. I was hungry and you gave me food. I was in prison and you came to visit me. That is the way we heard the word asylum. And from our Christian background, we were called to do as Jesus had commanded us. Even though I had already become a Buddhist practitioner, had that these are deep notions. These were part of my identity story. And then in time, asylum seekers became called migrants. Yeah. Same people, different word, but that word has a different narrative to it. People that are out there to get our welfare system. What no one realized is, or what I guess some realize it, is that the word change of vocabulary changes perception. The moment you do that, we think we see the world as it is, but that is not the case. So if our language is changed and the context of our language is changed, all of us, we start to see different things. Simply because of what the word implies. So regardless of what you think, and there's always been a complex topic, and I'm suggesting that I have a black and white solution for refugee problems. I always thought that this was unrealistic to begin with, but that is a different story. But just to highlight what change of vocabulary does to you. Every word contains a narrative, and that narrative changes our perception. That is what identity is. And so on the one hand, when we think about ourselves, this is something to protect. And very important to keep giving you some examples here. One of my own, one could say, Christian heroes in that sense is a famous preacher from Germany from the 1920s, 30s, and 40s until he was hung, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, that some of you might have heard of. He's quite popular in Protestant circles. In the 1930s, after Hitler had not won the elections, but took power over parliament, narratives changed rapidly. A judicial system in which people were protected against negative actions from others, negative actions became mandatory. He changed the law. And that change of law came with stories, and people got massively lost in stories. And you see that many people do not have independent stories. They just drift around in pools. And for different reasons. That's not always their fault. You know, when you're vulnerable, when you belong to a vulnerable community, or when you are income-wise very vulnerable, you depend on others. And so your stories are not for free. No, when you live in an environment where all your neighbors are voting for the Nazi party and you depend on them for your food, it's a hard price to say that you are of a different opinion. That can be maybe even not possible at all. You need to feed your children. Or where the owner of the company that you're working for is of that opinion. What do you do? Do you shore up your own opinion, but maybe lose your job and are no longer able to feed your children? Or do you talk alone? And these are not easy choices. But what I find remarkable about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and he was surely not the only one, but that he had, through his spiritual practice, in this case Christianity, had built himself what they called an ethical identity, a view that was robust. And so when the Nazis marched in, he asked himself, what is Jesus asking from me? What does it mean? What does it mean to be a disciple? And that is a very interesting point to ask ourselves. If we, in this changing world, who are we as followers of the Buddha? And I'm not going to tell you what that is that you need to figure out for yourself, but it is important to figure. It is important, as the other German philosopher Hannah Arendt said, that some of you might know as well, that it makes us persons when we can reflect with ourselves. It is the dialogue with ourselves that makes us into human beings. And so to have an ethical identity, to have an ethical center in that way, to have a story that is well researched allows you to do that. Like, what am I doing? What am I saying? What am I thinking? How does it relate to what I believe in? Yeah. Because we need to keep our spiritual independence. So far, that makes a bit of sense. Yeah. And so again, that is very important to keep that aspect in mind. We will see later on that is what the Madhyamakas expand. And the Madhyamakas will say all our notions only in fact have a social value. Every word that we use, every concept that we use is by definition social. Objects, things, people have no independent existence. The world that we see is a socially created world, for better or for worse. That is the ocean that we need to navigate. And so our identities again come from views. And now you know that these views are not self-invented. We live in a world of views. And there's many going around, and in a way that highlights again why what we highlighted with the prayers is that we live in a world where we have access to wholesome views without identification that were passed on to us by a living lineage, by people without a sense of identity. People like the Gendun Triso, by the way, who was called in Sera Gendrutula, the great yogi. Yeah. So he's an exquisite meditator apart from an extraordinary scholar. The funny story of him is, by the way, that I drove him around a lot. And he was truly other-serving. He was very attentive to everyone's needs, but if you would leave him alone for a moment, he would always immediately start to recite text. The idea is the rumor is that he memorized somewhere between 35,000 and 50,000 pages of text. And to keep that amount of stuff alive in your memory, you must always recite. If you leave these things alone, we don't have hard drives. Our memory is a living thing. So if you would sit with him in the car and you would leave him on his own, and all of a sudden you would hear like, and then some of the great texts of our tradition will be passing by in rocket speed. By the way, it was I could never make head or tails about what he was reciting, but quite impressive. And what a dedication and love it takes to spend a lifetime keeping all these texts alive. And with exquisite humility, because despite the fact that he knew all the stuff by heart, he would always bring paper text to refer to. And then he would sit there, and you know these Tibetan books now, and he would open that's like a big thing, and then he would turn to page 1 and then look at it studyingly, and then he would start talking, but never ever turn to page 2. He would just get lost in his, because he knew the text by heart already. It was just like he did not want to sort of make he did not want to show off. Like, see, I can teach all these. But then he became always so passionate about the Dharma, he would completely forget about the text to everyone's. I've never seen him ever turn to page 2. It was never necessary. Yeah. Yeah. And so on the basis of what do we in general, had the untrained mind in what, on the basis of what does he or she get their views from? And that is actually embarrassingly simple. And that is, we develop it of sexual pleasure. Yeah. It's about our wants. It's about our attachment and our belief in what hinders us in getting what we are attached to. Yeah. And that is surprising. Well, it's not surprising. It tells you, well, let's go a little bit further before I give an example of this. The sensual pleasures in that turn are based on, I think this goes on and off, no? Does it? I have the feeling that every time I turn to the right, my microphone turns off. Maybe that's my own delusions. Yeah. And so these, the sensual desires that we have, sensory desires that we have, are on the basis of feeling, and feeling is on the basis of contact. Yeah. That is the order that the Buddha gives. So we make contact with the world in a specific concept defined way. That gives rise on a karmic and habitual basis to specific feelings, on the basis of which we develop desire and aversion, aversion being a form of desire, either wanting something or not wanting, which we perceive to be in our way of the fulfillment of our desire. On the basis of that, we develop views. On the basis of the views, we develop identities in that order. But it is not obviously the order that we experience. We think it is the opposite way around. So far, you still with me? Yeah. Yeah. And so that is what we are trying to investigate. So on the one hand, we could say, in the challenging times that we face, no matter again what party we belong to, we are struck with 3 distinct problems. On the one hand, when we encounter an opinion that is not ours, what do we experience? Do you like it? Exactly. Resistance. It's hard. Yeah. And so that's problematic. Because the moment we feel aversion or resistance, or when we feel personally attacked, when you look deeply into the mind, there's one thing that happens, is that your cognitive function goes out of the window. Our cognitive function, our wisdom needs, our wisdom, our capacity to discern between that which is skillful or wholesome and that which is unskillful and unwholesome, that which brings well-being and that which doesn't, depends on us being mindful. Because we need to be mindful to introspect, to ask the right question. But the moment we feel friction, when we feel personally attacked, when we feel aversion, then that discernment is no longer ours. We become reactive. And so we start to scream back. We feel attacked, we retaliate. Yeah, open the newspaper tomorrow morning, and I think I just gave a comprehensive description of its content. Yeah. And that is what we would prefer not to indulge in. As Buddhist practitioners, or as spiritual practitioners that seek the betterment, the well-being of all living beings, that is not an option we have. That is not an option we have. Moreover, if you look really well, is that reactive arguing back never convinces anyone. Quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. Yeah. And so we will see that we have a sense of self that is unrealistic, according to Atiśa, according to the Madhyamaka tradition, that causes us to That is based on great attachment to views. And so we hold both our own identity and our views as to be a referent to the world as it exists, rather than something socially negated. Yeah. And that view, I often say that self-view is the most expensive thing that we have. If we would have spent all the time that we thought about I as an investment in work, we would have all been millionaires. Yeah. Because that our mind does from early in the morning to late in the evening, and probably much of your night as well. Yeah. That is the most costly thing that we have. And that is why it is so deeply to give up. So we need something better to work with. And that is what Atiśa will try to offer us. Yeah. Secondly, the other problem that we have is at the moment someone says something to us that we don't agree with, either if that is President Biden or President Trump for that matter. We experience the other person as inherently bad. We project our own feelings of that person on top of that person, giving a description that that person is that way, that we've seen an inherent characteristic of that person, which again fuels anger and attachment on the depending on where you are in this spectrum. Yeah. And also that produces the same reactive emotion and no way to navigate the situation as it is. If we react on either of these bases, the only thing that we will get is fueling the fire. And the more you scream at the other party, that's exactly what they're looking for. The more you give them reason to scream back. As a great philosopher once said, the function of extremes is to empty the middle ground. Because in the middle ground, that's the only place where we are really safe. And the extremes give us the delusion that the other party is really unsafe. And so you need the other extreme for your own safety. That is the trap that they try to catch us in. And the Buddha would say, what we really need to do is to stay in the center. We need to build the bridges between these communities. We need to bind. We need to bind where extremes, there's not people that do that. That is what we're going to look at. It's no one's fault. But we have the opportunity to take responsibility, and that is a great gift. Yeah. And we are all lost in our views because we all believe them to be true. That is exactly the same for everyone. Yeah. And so on the one hand, we have our self-view and our opinions lead us to reactive behavior, and the way others appear to us does exactly the same. We believe that the world exists in and of itself as it appears to us. And Atiśa will tell us that is not true at all. And that brings us to the latter thing. That is related to those two that we will need to overcome. Atiśa will highlight that we exist in reality in an opposite way. We, as Thich Nhat Hanh so beautifully states it, how we inter-exist. We inter-are. And so rather than our separate identities that we all experience and that is truly, you can see that for yourself in your own meditative life. To quote myself, if you meditate deeply, really deeply, when you let go, when you really look like what is there, and you find that you can't find the self. That's what you find is everyone else. And to be empty of self is to be full of others. If I want to tell an exhaustive story of who I am, I end up telling everyone's story. No, I depend for my immediate existence on thousands of people. They depend on thousands of others in their turn, and so on and so forth. In a few steps, I have told the story of the entire planet. If you would somehow change any of that, then I would simply cease to exist. That might be, then very or a little different, but this Gendun sitting here talking to you would no longer exist. This specific version of me in this moment would cease. And we all depend on an enormous web of life. So that is the other side of it. Because of our attachment to views and identities, both to ourselves and to others, we overlook this most primal of all things. That even your enemy is deep within. Yeah. Even stronger than that. To give you, to head slowly deeper into the topic. The argument that you will see often made in Mahamudra texts, if you are familiar with that practice. But it is often stated the world is mind only. How am I aware of you this evening? Do I see the outside world? It's not possible. In fact, no one has ever seen a mind-independent outside world. And we postulate it, and we believe with utmost force in our postulation. As in a materialist scientific world, we have shown that this is the case, and the reality is not the case at all. We are talking about things within the realm of our own experience. I know you only as an aspect of my own mind, which is true for everyone. So you are profoundly intermingled with my awareness. So how I see you, how I hold you matters to me a lot. Because if I turn you into my enemy, I have turned myself into an enemy. Because we are related. If you are my enemy, I am yours. And if I care for you, I become your caretaker. Our identities are interrelated. There's no way to tell the Gendun story without telling the you story. And so for me, as an individual, how I hold you, how I hold anyone is of utmost importance to me, because it is the other person is the reflection of who I am in this moment. If I look at anyone in this world with hatred, aversion, jealousy, whatever you have, then that is what I become. I'm remade in my own unwholesome emotion. To see the other person as unwholesome is to become unwholesome myself. And that is very important to understand what that means. That doesn't mean there are no unwholesome deeds. There are for sure. But that is not the problem that we are struggling with. So far, that makes sense? Yeah. And so that means that is what our meditative practice is all about, that we will do this weekend extensively. And we need to see the world differently. Professor Garfield, that I will interview tomorrow morning, has a beautiful word for this: moral phenomenology. I had not come up with that word, but we do agree. I will happily steal it from him. Where he says, I often phrase it differently, but let's give him, let's sell his book. On Chandrakeerti, by the way, you should buy it. It's a very good book. I agree with him finally. Last time we spoke a few years ago at Mind and Life, he was getting there. We definitely did not agree, but we are meeting at the middle point, in the middle ground. But he says, in Buddhism, our morality is not based on judgments. Our morality is based on how we see each other. We have a morality of sight, perception. Yeah. And that shows nicely in the way we describe our holy path. What is the name of the moment of great transformation where we become something differently entirely? When we say, I take refuge in the Sangha, what is that Sangha? These are people that have seen things as they are. Our transformation is not a path of doing, it's a path of seeing. And so unless we see the other through the eyes of what is to be seen on the path of seeing, we risk throwing fuel on the fire. We need to see what is there. We need to see that for ourselves. So when we come out of meditation and we look at each other, we see each other as how we exist. Empty of selves, empty of that identity story. We're profoundly interrelated. And then we have the stillness inside, not to be reactive when we are attacked, when we hear things that we don't agree with. We don't see the other convicted to that sense of an unchanging self, where the only outcome could possibly be to violate that other person because we need to get him or her. Where we see the world as fluid and as interconnected as it is. And we truly become sons and daughters of the Buddha. And we walk with him. We walk with him for as long as it takes, because what else is there to do but that? So far? Yes. Yeah, please do so.
Jay, you had a question?
Yeah,
Please
I do.
unmute
Thank
yourself
you.
and go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. The question I've got is when I experience this interconnection with everyone, there is the tendency to feel overwhelmed because I'm aware of so much suffering. And I don't know how to deal with that because I don't want to have it as an impediment. So could you talk about that a bit?
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's one of the greatest challenges of meditation here, language is one of my favorite topics in the Dharma. We often talk about meditation on compassion, and that is the other word. We have two words that I'm going to delete the moment I have control over your dictionary. Compassion is one of them, because, I mean, apart from its different interpretations, it does mean suffering with. Yeah. And in fact, in Buddhist context, the word is karuna, which would be my current favorite translation is care. That is, when I used the word care this evening, I was referring to that aspect of the mind. Care does not observe suffering. Care observes the person that is having the suffering. And in a Mahayana context, it observes someone that has Buddha nature. It observes a future Buddha to be that at the moment is suffering. That is what care observes. And so the central observed object of care in Buddhism is in fact a hopeful object. You know for yourself that one day that person's path will end. The person will find his or her own body tree and come to the final understanding. And in relation to that, you experience the deep sadness that that person nevertheless struggles with this problem. But that observed object makes it actually feasible to all living beings, because what you observe is something magnificent. Yeah. And so it contains both an empathetic awareness of what is troubling them, but it is held by, not entirely the good word, but for the moment we could accept it. It's held by hope. Or hope is not exactly a Buddhist term. One could say maybe even better, trust or insight that they will get there. Might take a while, but they will. Does that make sense? Jai?
Yeah. No, that's very helpful for me. And yeah, I just have to remember to come back to that point of view because it's so hard, obviously, when you see
Yes.
so much suffering in the world. Yeah.
Yes. But again,
Yeah.
yeah. So that is why our meditation matters so much. Maybe let's then give a short introduction to where we are going, and then next week I will finish with a commentary on this text. And so the point here is, how do we then hold it? What does that Buddha nature mean? Nope. Okay. No, that's okay. My nose is fine. Yeah. Yeah. The Dharma heals all things. That is really true. Yeah. I've sat here in this position with migraines and whatever you have, and just give me half an hour to chat away about Madhyamaka and everything is back working. Yeah. I should sell that. Yeah. The point is that it is overwhelming in final analysis, because with regard to the persons that are suffering, nor with regard to the suffering themselves, do we see it as it exists. It appears to us as self-existing. That is how all things appear to our awareness, as though the object in and of itself shows its characteristics, as they say, as it projects its characteristics on our awareness, like there's a pre-existing thing that we come to know, that pre-exists independent of mind. And that, the Buddha says, is where all our problems start. That's both with regard to ourselves. So when we talk about the self view, we believe that what we have inside, that is I, that we tell the story about, is a pre-existing, self-existing, authentic, findable phenomenon that you could see even in the complete absence of anyone else, or anything else for that matter. And we believe that with regard to, in this case, feelings as well, dukkha. And the Buddha says that is not possible at all. Nothing has self-existence. And then we come, so to give you an introduction, on the one hand, and let's talk about phenomena in the world. There's another category of that we'll leave to the side for the moment, because it just complicates everything. When we talk about chairs and dogs and people, to make you included, the dog and our tiger. And for those on Zoom, we have a dangerous dog here. We saw him operate. Yeah. So I shall praise him a lot for my own safety. Yeah. So when we talk about the things that we find in the world, we have to say that they exist dependently in three different distinct ways. On the one hand, things depend on their parts completely. Yeah. So when you take a car as an example, you would have to say that the car depends on parts that are not car at all. So a wheel is not a car. A car is something by which you can drive from A to B. And the wheel is not a car. The windshield is not a car. The engine is not a car, and so on and so forth. But if you take everything away that is not a car, you are left with, well, nothing at all. What will become later next week important is that, interesting enough, it's also true the other way around. Yeah. In fact, an engine is only an engine when it is part of the car. And that shows you one interesting thing, that I'm not saying that the car doesn't exist. Cars do exist because, well, later on, Nina's car will drive me back home. So it exists. But the argument is it does not self-exist in contrast toward the way it appears to me. And when I pay $500,000 for a Ferrari, I buy something self-existing. But when you buy a Ferrari from me for $500,000 and I bring you the parts, you will not be happy, because none of the parts are attractive. And that is an interesting phenomenon. And so the way the car appears to us and the way the car exists, therefore, are dissimilar. the question online.
Thank you, Venerable Gendun. I have a question about this regarding, for example, Milarepa could fly, or Milarepa could like hide himself inside a horn. So like, what is like the underlying mechanism for like Buddhist magic when they can transcend relative existence? It's almost like their mind can control relative existence, which, how does it work?
That is an interesting topic, but way out of our theme.
Okay.
Yeah. So I am going to ask you if I can leave it for the moment.
Of course.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. These are the things between master and disciple to make something visible about the fact that the world is merely labeled, but we are not even close to an understanding of what that means, to have some idea of what happens here in Milarepa and his student. So on the one hand, by a tiger, I must say, it makes me think of something else. It's just an intermezzo. Can I have 5 minutes of your time extra? Yeah, okay, because then I can throw in a funny story before we finish it. But at one point I worked for a refugee center, and they thought it was a good idea to introduce management training. And I spent about 10 minutes in the training, because then we all got a sticker that we were supposed to put on our mirror in the bathroom so that we could read it every morning. And it said, "Tiger, I love you." And I thought, no way that I'm listening even a second longer to that person. Like, that is completely ridiculous. I shall never, ever do that. And I just got up and walked out like, yeah. Yeah, I should have kept one for him. Yeah. Anyway, that refreshes our mind before I finish my argument of this evening. So the car depends on its parts, and by that the parts also depend on the car. And this I will play out with between ours as beings and our societies next week. That is the argument of neither it's the same or different that we will find in Atiśa's text. And so that is one way that the car exists. The car exists, but the car exists dependently on its parts. So that is not the way it appears to us. That is why our mind gets mistaken. That's true. What is true for cars is true for chairs, is also true for me. Yeah. Gendun depends on the body and the mind. And well, most of us are old enough to realize that our body has a life of its own. And anyone that has ever sat on a cushion trying to make the mind silent knows that the mind also has, comes a strange sentence, but definitely a mind up. Yeah. So body and mind are not self, but together they produce the person, and they function as part of the person. So the person exists, but in dependency on body and mind. Is that enough? No. If we keep the example of the car going for a while, we also see that the car is dependent on causes and conditions. And in some ways it is obvious. It needs roads, it needs gasoline or electricity, it needs garages, it needs factories, it needs designers, it needs factory workers, it needs metal and rubber and so on and so forth. It requires a surprising amount of causes and conditions to bring about a single car that you can drive from A to B. Yeah. So far this makes sense, I guess. Yeah. So hey, if all of a sudden all electricity and gasoline would cease to exist on this planet, cars are no longer cars, because you can't drive with them from A to B anymore. They're just heaps of junk. That's it. Then the word car makes no sense anymore, because that definition doesn't hold anywhere in the world anymore. Yeah. Unless you want to do the Flintstone thing, but here we go. Yeah. But then there's one more aspect, and that is the deepest one and the most difficult one to understand. The car depends on mental labeling. If you this whole phenomenon to recently I read another article about an uncontacted tribe in the Amazon that there's like a whole debate on to keep them safe. If you would bring the car to them, what would they see? We don't know what they would see. There's no way to say, because we can't unsee what we have already seen. But we know one thing for sure, they don't see a car. We don't know if they see anything at all. Maybe they just see a heap of parts that don't make sense to them, that they don't even understand to be parts of a whole. So a car is only a car to a driver in a culture that uses cars. And that is the deepest form of dependency. All things exist in final analysis on being labeled by mind. So phenomena, all phenomena, have no self-existence. All phenomena exist in dependence in these three ways. So they exist, but they don't exist the way they appear to exist. Because to our mind, they self-exist. They exist independently. They have something authentically in and of themselves. That is what we pay money for when we buy the Ferrari or the latest iPhone or whatever is our fancy. That is the thing that we tell all these stories, all these identity stories about. That is the basis of why we tell all these aversion stories, like that is a bad person for that and that reason, or that is an attractive person for that and that reason. It all evolves around a profoundly mistaken perception. Yeah. And so Atiśa will next week decisively argue that this is not even plausible. Yeah. Things can only function when they in fact exist. That is the only way, the only form of existence that ever made sense. And that is what we need to learn to see. First of all, by way of ourselves, to experience ourselves in that open way. Because we know to be empty, if we don't have a fixed self-story anymore, then we can't be hurt. Then whatever someone says does not do anything. We can just take it as it is, what it is, information. I might not agree with it, might agree with it, maybe neither, but it does not elicit a reactive emotion anymore. It allows me to stay calm. Okay, that is what you hold. Good to know. Also to have inner openness, to have an inner freedom, by the way, also liberates us from many of our own psychological neuroses. Depression is a self-story, and a pretty bad one. And so on and so forth. The imposter syndrome that so many struggle with is a story, is a narrative, and a wrong one. And we need to come to understand with regard to ourselves that we depend on everyone, even our enemy, and in profoundly intimate ways. Not only because he or she is in 3 or 4 rows of interconnectedness doing something for us, but because the way we behold the other is the way we form ourselves. Yeah. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to be someone's enemy. I don't want to be feared by someone else. I would like to be someone's caretaker. I would like to be able to be seen by someone else as someone that you can come to be cared for. Because in safety relationships, people behave very differently. No, and rather than the prayers, I would like to finish with a last story that makes sense, and then I send you home with a story to think about. The last time I was in this neighborhood, I hitchhiked out of Taos. They brought me to that bridge over the, I was dumped there. And then I started to hitchhike from there, and I slowly made my way to Los Angeles. And around a place called Kingston, I don't even remember if that is in Utah or Arizona. Well, Arizona, okay, now finally I know after all these years again. And so I'm there, and I am supposed to be meeting my brother in Los Angeles, and I'm not sure how much time that is taking. But I had hitchhiked all my way from New York to Toronto, then all the way to Honduras, and all the way back up. And I had gotten many rides, but there was one thing that I still wanted, that the United States are famous for: trucks. So I posted at a truck stop. That was my final ride that I needed to get. And I did not know that it was prohibited for truck drivers to actually stop for hitchhikers at the time already. It's 99. And I sat there for, I guess, about an hour with my backpack on. And imagine at that time I had extremely long hair, actually. I made all of my female colleagues jealous. Yeah, and piercings and the whole works, tattoos. And so I'm just trying my best to get a truck. And then finally this massive puffing and hissing and screaming things come to a standstill in front of me. And I climb in and I open the door, and the guy sitting there, it's like Arnold Schwarzenegger, but not that handsome, if you call Arnold Schwarzenegger handsome. But I looked at his arms and I thought that he has arms the size of my legs. Like, yeah. And I climb in, and it's next to him, and on his dashboard is a magazine, and I will not mention the publisher, but there was open on the page in which Bill Clinton got himself, I think, pulled into force or some horrible end, and it was like, okay, this is a different world that I'm used to. Yeah. But interestingly enough, now obviously this guy was from a very different, is a world that I knew from television. Maybe, what is it called again? Something with a rider. No, not Knight Rider. No, the movie with Jack Nicholson and Easy Rider, yeah. And they go south and then all things go wrong. And that's undoubtedly a very judgmental representation of people in the South. So that is my only knowledge of that sort of world. And I'm sitting with that in the cabin of a massive truck with a nice Southern accent. And but I realized that despite the fact that this was definitely a world about which I had very prejudiced opinions, he had taken me in. No, whatever, that was already like a puncturing of my prejudice, because he had stopped for a guy with very long hair and lots of piercing and tattoos with a backpack on his back to take me somewhere. And I thought to myself, no, this is the only time I will ever get to see this world from the inside out. Because no matter of how much traveling I could do through that world, I would never experience it as the way they experience it. If I want to know this world, this is the time, just to ask questions. So I started to ask questions, and I discovered a world that I could not have even begun to imagine, because nothing of my world compares to his in terms of the exterior aspects. But then bit by bit, we came to the essential things, like why these things actually matter to him. Why do these views and these opinions and these types of behavior and gun shooting and whatever you have, why does it matter to him? It mattered to him because it gives him safety and acknowledgement. It was his community. And that I understand, because I also need that. And then for a while, because he drove me all the way to Los Angeles, and you know now how far that is, that was a whole day's drive. And for that drive, we were one community. We were two people in the same cabin exchanging weird stories, because then we figured out that he did not know my world either. For him, I could have come from Mars and he from Venus. He would have not have liked this comparison, I think, by the way, somehow. I shall turn the other way around. He came from Mars. I'm happy to accept Venus. Yeah. No, and then at one point during the ride, he asked me if he could buy me dinner. I said, yeah, why not? There was dinner in the McDonald's. And then the essence came out that there was this really bruised young man. He was an adult person, but this was still a 15-year-old that was hurt. He ended up crying on my shoulder. And you think like that, that man I understood. That's a man I can recognize. Just another guy. And that for me was such an eye-opener. Because it allows you, we were from two extremely different worlds, two very different perspective spectrums. You know, we lived in unimaginable different worlds, and yet we could build a bridge. He made a hell of an effort to get me to a safe place somewhere on the outskirts of Los Angeles, from where I could then the next day move to the center. You know, he took really good care of me. Yeah. And I think, you know, those that have realized emptiness can do that because you see openness. You can go into that truck and you think like, well, no, there's nothing to hold on to in me. There's nothing to hold on to in him either. We are all, in a profound way, circumstantial, contextual, changing. We're like rivers or winds. No, we can't be put in a box. We just make believe that. And if you show that openness, that changingness to the other person is happy to flow together with you. And if you grasp at your own identity, that is what you get from the other. The other will grasp back. So how do you cross that boundary? Is by becoming fluid, because it allows the other person to become fluid. So go home, be fluid. And then we will continue our conversation about how Atiśa then guides us through meditation next Tuesday. But again, so this weekend I will try to get some of the topics of this done. We'll see how far we get, but the topic is actually the 7 awakening factors. And so there will be 2 days almost of meditation. So I will give very little theory there, but make you look and give you the tools to do deep looking that facilitate both absorption and direct insight. Yeah. So that we can have like a way to look at how this specific understanding then we can integrate into meditation. And then to the extent that we get a feel for this by the end of the weekend, then we have something then to inform our understanding of Atiśa's text next week as well. That makes sense to you. Yeah. So, as I'm accustomed to say, go forth and multiply your virtues. You can't escape Catholic upbringing. But I was never much into making children, so here you are. And some of us are a little bit too late to make more children, so let's not do that. Yeah. Anyway, thank you for being here. Thank you for being here online. Such a joy to visit this, I must say, magnificent Gompa. Yeah, I'm sitting with my back to the wrong direction, to be honest. I would happily sit there to watch it, but to observe it. It's truly a very inspiring place, and yeah, that says something about your community as well. Feels like a place of good practice, good friendship, good community. Yeah. So thank you for welcoming me here, for making me feel at home, and we'll talk on a little bit. And for those that want to crawl into the into a shell, so if you meditate really well on emptiness this evening, then you should try towards the end to do so.